We're pleased to kickstart the day with, I think, a really exciting topic, in all honesty, is looking at a new frontier for MMM focused on localized measurement. Now, just a little bit about Arima. We're supporting dozens of brands and their partners in the US, Canada, worldwide, with an unlimited use MMM platform. And from that vantage point, it's quite gratifying. We get to see what the discourse, how it's changed, the positive change in the financial discourse within organizations when they use MMM. But even today, there's a lot of organizations that are still not using MMM as part of understanding business outcomes, and we certainly are focused on trying to change that. And going on a little bit of a journey specifically to understand why some brands still not using MMM. So we're going to obviously talk about the next frontier, but the current frontier certainly is to understand how we got to where we are. And the lovely folks from Kantar, they put out this study a few times and then most recently refreshed it, and spoke about over a third, just over a third, 34% of brands still not utilizing MMM to measure business outcomes. And we actually think that that number is a little conservative. If you look at the methodology, peel it away, Kantar was looking at brands that are spending $1 million or more in annual budget for marketing. And if you take into account local brands, regional brands, emerging national brands, even brands that are working in the global markets, we think that number is a bit higher than certainly 34%. But looking at that number and talking to those folks that aren't using MMM, we wanted to understand why. And in that process, we picked up a few collaborative clients along the way to talk about brands and how they can utilize MMM more effectively. But let's talk about some of those non-users and what they said and how they became fans of using MMM from a platform MMM-based MMM such as Arima. First off is speed. So getting and providing results that are within minutes, again, on average about 15 minutes or more, so faster than your Uber Eats delivery versus days, weeks, or even months later. Now you think about getting results months later, you're already on to your next financial challenge, let alone understand what had happened several months prior. Accessibility, this one is a unique one. We have a lot of really terrific data scientists that utilize the platform, the MMM platform that Arima supports. But it is the key with accessibility is providing for all brand stakeholders to be able to utilize a tool, not just for just reading access, but to be able to deploy, interpret, and then action against the results quickly. And then there's also cost. And when I talk about cost, it's about the cost of running it. So if we think about that, that's a good question. Typically we get like, well, what's the minimum budgets that we should be using for MMM? And I think that's a good question, but perhaps the third most important and maybe like a distant third compared to complexity of the marketing mix, and certainly also the data under measurement, a year minimum, 2 years or more is certainly ideal. But when we talk about that question of minimum budgets, I've heard in the marketplace 5 million or perhaps 2 or 3. And we just, from our point of view, we just don't understand why those numbers make any sense. We've seen lots of brands utilizing MMM with budgets significantly lower than those figures. So if you do hear those figures in the marketplace, we'd argue that, well, first off, is that about your margins and profitability, or is it about theirs? So that's number one. And number two, from those conversations, whatever you may be paying for MMM, it's likely way too much. So there's speed, accessibility, and cost, but one other factor tops all of them, and that is focusing on workflow. When you think about what MMM means, unless it's doing something, it's somehow providing some kind of action in a process. Otherwise, it's just a really expensive science project that doesn't really have a lot of long-term value. So that's really what the key demand was. Well, if we're going to use your platform, we want it to do something. We need to go somewhere. It needs to be part of the corporate discussion for financial decisions. And that's pretty much what we do. Is we talk about a marketer support suite is being able to put that MMM somewhere, those results, those validated results going somewhere and doing something. Either in our suite of tools, which if you want to see them, they're powered by synthetic data and you want to see how they work, that's great. We have a booth, we could give you a demo, but more importantly, being able to take those MMMs and the results and putting them somewhere, either through our tools, all or part, or into their own tech stack and their own decisioning or financial decisioning systems. And something happens when you do that. That actionability becomes becomes a workflow, and that's the key. So if you're helping support marketing activity, and then you're able to start working and understanding the incrementality priors that could be put into the system, or also other external sources of data. So either from a library that we provide, or helping them bring their own. So then all of a sudden you can talk about awareness, or attention, or competitive, or any other type of factors being able to be part of the solution for MMM. And something happens when you do that. It's like a flywheel effect. And when that flywheel gets going, two really interesting things happen working, collaborating with organizations. First off, they stop thinking about the time it takes, the accessibility or the cost, and they start running analysis concurrently. So imagine running 12 or more analyses, models concurrently, and the output is there in 15 minutes or less, not weeks or months later, number one. And number two, which I find more gratifying as well, is that all of a sudden MMM becomes part of the measurement journey. That's typically what everyone in this room thinks about, is that we're going through an understanding of how long-term brands evolve, how they can support from a marketing perspective the business objectives, and you're going on that measurement journey with that organization. And the questions get better, not just about what MMM is currently doing, but what else can it do for me? So here's a little bit of a word cloud. You see just some of the questions we get and the different ways that we support beyond just the basic analysis. Help me refine the ad stock, build the benchmarks, dimensionalize the forecasting. But there's one that's here that tops them all as far as the question is, help me make MMM work for local. And that's what we did.
Hi, I'm Hannah. I am the Director of Media at CornerTable Creative. Sweetgreen is one of our clients. Hopefully you've heard of them. They have a couple hundred locations throughout the United States. They have 23 here in Chicago, 2 of which are a 5-minute walk away if you're already thinking about lunch. Fall menu drops today. Highly recommend. Best Brussels sprouts you'll ever have. But Sweetgreen, while they are a fantastic client, they face a lot of the same barriers that TS was just mentioning. They're very cost constrained and they were nervous. So when you take a look at their business, what you see on the screen in front of you right now is a map of the United States that shows the concentration of Sweetgreen restaurants and indexed to the populations of those regions, which is the green line. Density of stores is the blue line. And what you can see is that in regions like Chicago and DC, they're roughly proportional. But when you're looking at the Bostons and the DCs, you start to see that we have a lot more locations in comparison to the populations of those cities. And then the LAs, the Texas, Florida, where there's a lot more room to grow. But historically, Sweetgreen has really been looking at their media nationally. And just from looking at this one chart, you can kind of just intuitively understand that that's probably not the best way to do it. And so we jumped at the chance to partner with Arima and with Eden to help bring a higher level of intellectual rigor to how they are looking at measuring the impact of their media.
So we started by looking nationally. Even though we know everything's different, and guess what we found out? This is probably something everyone here has seen before. Google, oh, it's crushing it. Yeah, we're doing brand search. So what? We pay our digital rent. Everything's fine. All right. Now, what are we actually learning whenever we look at this and we run this nationally? All right, well, I see Meta's kind of outperforming my Out of Home. TikTok over here, totally underinvested, right? Now, what's wrong with this picture? Well, I'm only running Out of Home in 4 markets. I plugged it into the national model. Why? Why not, right? That's all I have available, right? That's what a lot of marketers only have available, is to look at things nationally. and then try to like piece together the rest of it. So the big question becomes, all right, if there's so many differences in the markets, and you know what, this isn't a bad thing. Already, I've identified an area of opportunity. Let's push some more in TikTok. Our media plan might just look like, hey, go 20% more in TikTok. Let's see how that impacts the overall business. Let's see if that overall campaign ROAS comes up, and we'd be happy. But do these national results actually hold at the local level? Well, what we found is that maybe 11 out of the 13 markets, Meta's performing better. Meta has much more headspace available than TikTok. And so what this allows us to do, whenever we went through and just did these models, and coming back to the idea of Arima and this idea that if we can use MMM as an investigative tool and actually go down and look at this local level and understand how are these markets differentiated, well, now we can actually think about media. And just looking at this, it's not just, oh, is Meta better than TikTok? But I think all of us are starting to do some classification problems, right? We're saying, hey, you know what? There's some markets such that Meta overly outperforms TikTok, and I might want to lean into Meta there. There's some, like markets 10 through 11, where it's kind of neck and neck, and so that might change what my testing looks like there. And there's some where TikTok's going over. So this allows me to investigate and figure out, well, what's going on? Why is that? I don't know, budget, right? Like whenever we're thinking about MMM, what's one of the biggest drivers of why we see our ROAS change? And it comes back to that budget. But once again, having this at a local level allows us to understand what some of those nuances are in the market dynamics. In this case, whenever we're looking at the national level, we might just say, oh yeah, look at this. Meta, out-of-home, neck and neck. Out-of-home kind of outperforms at that larger spend level. But that's not the case whenever we actually come down to the local level. Somewhere like a market one, where we're not running out-of-home at all, the story's different, right? The interplay of media is different. That's why it's important for us to be able to come down to this local level and make better decisions. Other things happen here as well, which when you look at that at the lower spend level, TikTok is outperforming, but at that higher spend level, that's where Meta has some more space to actually drive some returns. And so that's what's critical here, not just understanding where the ROAS is, but being able to identify those curves. And then, more importantly, you have some very local media at play, which, yes, can you put those into a national model? Absolutely. But it's a local media. So we need to be looking at that locally. Every market is different, especially for something like out-of-home, where every market is going to have a different dynamic, it's going to have different inventory. This isn't like buying national TV where you're going to get the same 30-second spot. You're going to have all sorts of things happening here. And so by taking this down at that local level, and we were doing our difference in difference models, all sorts of other validation to understand what the performance was, but having this within MMM actually gives us that ability to connect back and look at the performance, in this case saying, okay, well, where should I go? Out-of-home, digital. Where should I start to focus my investment? Okay, market 4, you know what? I might just tamper down my out-of-home there. Market 3, this is great. I'm going to lean in a little bit more there. Markets 1 and 2, once again, I'm about an even split. So essentially, we've got these dynamics so we can do better planning and understand where media is going. And once again, it comes back to that spend, right? Now I know where should I be investing, how can I make those shifts, and now I can actually start to measure at that market level, because that's where we're seeing the data come through. And I can understand, hey, you know what, Chicago, it's going to blow up because Hannah just told us all about the Brussels sprouts with the maple glaze that just launched today, 2 locations within a 5-minute walk.
And so all of this great work from Chris is really revolutionizing the way that we're able to plan going into 2026 and even the final quarter of 2025. And it frees us from the platform metrics, and we can really look at our marketing investment region by region, market by market. And so what you can see here, while as previously we would have allocated our budgets and invested, to the proportions that you see on the far, I guess you guys are looking at it on the left for the national, we can now adapt that market by market. And so we are really excited to continue our partnership with Arima going into 2026, and hope to see you guys back next year where we can talk about the impact of that.
Yeah. So a couple final comments.
So yeah, I think the closing comments, national, we know it can be misleading. It's not super misleading. Like I said, when we looked at that, when we made a good decision, absolutely, right? Like we are underinvested in TikTok. We're resolving that, I get it. Local, though, allows us to actually do that a little bit more granularly and have that understanding of true market nuance while taking into account some of the local channels. So now what this does is it allows us to open up to even more local channels. Maybe we want to try radio. Maybe we want to try something else that's going to really help within those markets so we can evolve our channel mix.
Well, that just reinforcing that is that this is just the beginning of a journey. So is that you talk about the ability to do this from a workflow perspective.
Yep.
So it is radio. Understanding, and that's a demand when you think of the marketplace, is that does radio get proper representation within MMM, and not just podcast and say satellite, but also local broadcast and into TV, and the benefits of even looking at how potentially to look at local and regional cable and how it's properly represented within an MMM, but focus specifically on how we evolve the MMM on a local level. And one other item just to share is that we've started this journey working, and again, it's been focused not on the concern of time or accessibility or cost, but incorporating it into supporting the Sweetgreen workflow and working with you and working with other brands. We were recently recognized as the best new analytics platform by Digiday, so we're kind of pleased about that, and certainly thank you for that, but we certainly welcome the opportunity to support your success as well. Thank you very much.
Cool, thank you.